though they say crime doesn't pay, several rich gangsters prove otherwise. While most end up dead or in jail, a very lucky few get to spend their money. In the early part of the 20th century, gangsters made a lot of money selling liquor during Prohibition. In the 70s, many gangsters made a killing of heroin. Nowadays, the richest gangsters make their money from importing cocaine from Colombia through Mexico and into the US. While it is hard to determine the exact wealth of these masterminds, here are the 10 richest gangsters of all time. Frank Lucas capitalized off the heroin trade in the 1960s and 1970s by using an East Asian connection during the Vietnam War, cutting off the Italian mafia who controlled the trade in his Harlem at the time. Lucas, originally from North Carolina, employed members of his family to take over the heroin trade in New York and New Jersey. Lucas would claim to have sold $1 million worth of heroin a day in his prime and claimed to have a net worth of over $52 million on top of a large supply of liquid assets, namely heroin. Griselda Blanco, also known as the Black Widow or the Cocaine Queen of Miami, was a drug lord for the Colombian Medellin cartel. She controlled the cocaine trade through violence and intimidation, making $80 million a month during the 70s and 80s. Reports claim that at her peak, Griselda Blanco had more than $500 million. After serving 10 years in jail on drug charges, Blanco would return to her native Colombia. Al Capone is perhaps the most notorious gangster of all time and also one of the richest. During Prohibition, Capone controlled the illegal alcohol, prostitution, and gambling rackets in Chicago, which brought in $100 million a year at its prime. Capone's money allowed him to bribe police officials, judges, and even the mayor of Chicago. Unfortunately, he could not bribe the IRS, who convicted him of tax evasion in 1932 and sentenced him to 11 years in prison. El Chapo is one of Mexico's most infamous drug lords. He is the head of the Sinaloa cartel, which smuggles in billions of dollars from Colombia through Mexico and into the United States. Guzman became rich enough to make Forbes' list of 1,000 wealthiest people in the world, as well as their top 60 most powerful people in the world. With a net worth of over $5 billion, Guzman was jailed in 1993 but escaped from prison in 2001. Italian mobster Fat Tony Salerno made his millions running the numbers and drugs rackets in East Harlem after most other Italian mobsters left the area, as it became more black and Latino in the 1960s, making tens of millions of dollars. As the frontman for the Genovese crime family, Salerno was named America's top gangster by Fortune magazine in 1986 due to his wealth of more than $1 billion and influence. In 1988, Salerno was convicted of racketeering charges and was sentenced to 70 years in prison. Before moving on, please consider subscribing to our channel to stay updated with interesting facts about the planet. Leader was one of the founders of the Colombian Medellin cartel. While in prison, Leader met Boston-born drug trafficker George Young, who helped him import and distribute cocaine from his native Colombia into the United States, accumulating $2.7 billion. Cocaine made Leader so rich that he owned his own island in the Bahamas and offered to pay off Colombia's debt. Leader would eventually be extradited to the United States and sentenced to life in prison, which was reduced after he agreed to testify against former Panamanian President Manuel Noriega in 1992. Lansky was a Jewish immigrant from Poland who would make a fortune of gambling, both legal and illegal. Lansky would join notorious gangsters Charles Lucky Luciano and Ben Bugsy Siegel to run a gang that would be known as Murder Incorporated. Lansky would later turn to focus on gambling, setting up operations in Florida, Las Vegas, and Cuba before the Cuban Revolution in 1982. Forbes would name him as one of the 400 richest people in America. Lansky would be indicted for tax evasion and fled to Israel. He would later return to the US to face charges and was acquitted in 1974. Lansky would die a free man in Miami at age 83. Joseph Kennedy is the patriarch of one of America's most powerful and prestigious families. One of his sons became president, another district attorney and presidential candidate, and another a senator. At his peak, Kennedy was one of the richest men in America, but as the saying goes, behind every great fortune, there is a great crime. Kennedy was already in the liquor business before Prohibition, but according to several books and gangsters, became a bootlegger with ties to the New York and Chicago underworlds after liquor was made illegal. After Prohibition was ended, Kennedy made a fortune off selling legitimate liquor as well as through Hollywood and the stock market. Kennedy was named one of the 20 richest people in America in 1954 by Fortune magazine and had a net worth of more than $300 million, which would be in the high billions today. Escobar is perhaps the most notorious drug lord of the modern era. He ran the Medellin cartel, which imported billions of dollars of cocaine into the United States. Pablo's money brought him great power as he was able to bribe officials or have them killed if they wouldn't take his bribes. Forbes magazine named Escobar the seventh richest man in the world with a net worth of $25 billion. In 1993, Escobar was killed by Colombian forces with US assistance after he escaped from a Colombian prison. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was the head of the Mexican Juarez cartel. He was known as Lord of the Skies due to his private fleet of planes, including 22 private 727 jet airliners, which were used to import cocaine from Colombia to Mexico, where it was later smuggled into the United States. Fuentes had an estimated net value of $25 billion, almost twice as much as Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, and the DEA called him the most powerful drug trafficker of his era. He would die while undergoing plastic surgery to alter his appearance in 1997.